You didn't even let me finish what I was saying. But what I wanted to get into more than anything else is the difference between a brother to me and my understanding, and then at the same time, kind of a noticing thing of what an inna is to me. And so, growing up in jail and growing up around the black community and the urban community, there's this huge, since I don't really know when it started because I'm not black, obviously. I've studied tons of black culture, so on and so forth, and sat among the culture. But nobody ever talks about, man, we just started saying the N-word in the 60s. No one really says anything like that. Someday it just appeared. It's like, here's an apple. So, I understand why they say it. It's kind of, from my understanding and from what I've heard about other brothers explaining, it's kind of like, it's their way of taking that derogative name that they used, white men, used to call, I've never called anybody that, but my ancestors possibly, but, that's hard to say realistically. But, so the realistic thing is that, I understood the understanding as to where it came from. And it was brothers legitimately kind of waking up and being like, man, we want to take back some control and some authority and some power. Because, when you enslave somebody with a name or any name, it doesn't matter. You could call me stupid, and that's legitimately going to ingrain eventually into my mind and cripple me and oppress me mentally. And so when white men used to, put black people down in the slaves' days, that N-word was that word that they always used. There were other words too, obviously, but that was one of those words that they always used. And so eventually, from what I'd understood and what I'd heard about other brothers that I had spoken with and been friends with over the years and so on and so forth, acquaintances, however you want to look at it, is that, that's kind of a black man's way of being like, we're going to take back some of that. And we're going to legitimately, we're going to own, it's like if you own that name, right, then guess what? You don't have the kind of power that you would have had over that person. It'd be like if you call me stupid, I'd be like, ha ha ha, okay, yeah, I'm stupid, But turning it into a name that I'd call everybody in a sense like that. But the thing I wanted to talk about is that I think what's had happened in a way, right, is that by doing that, although I understand it from a psychological standpoint, kind of, wanting to snatch back some of that power and realistically be like, you're not going to oppress us anymore, and you're not going to, call us these names, and we're going to own that name, and by owning that name, we're going to realistically 100% be able to overcome the struggle and all of this other stuff like that goes along with being a black man in America and being oppressed and so on and so forth. And so what I think has happened, though, when you look at the N-word, even though you chop off the ER and put an A on there and so on and so forth, what you end up finding is that I think in some ways that name itself still kind of can cripple people sometimes, man. And I think that because, although a brother isn't dumb enough to be like, oh, man, the N-word in the ER, the two different versions are different, it's derived from the same thing. And so therefore, I think, and this is my opinion, and I'm more than welcome. I've actually never had this conversation. Well, no, that's not true. I've had the conversation randomly with a couple of people. But I've never gotten like a direct, like, you could be right, you could be wrong. It's more of like okay, we understand where you're coming from, but I don't know. It's kind of one of those things. And so I think, though, that when you realistically look at it, I think that it's more crippling. Because if you look at, let's just start with brother, right? Like if I find a brother, right, and I'm like, what's up, brother, right? How you doing? And so on and so forth. However the conversation goes after that, right? There's one from a white man's perspective to a black man's perspective. There's this kind of psychological thing that starts to take place. And it's ultimately from a white man's perspective, it's like, black man, obviously, I don't look at you as an animal or whatever it is my ancestors or some of these other white people have legitimately referred to you as. I look at you as as a human being, as a person. And so if I'm like, what's up, brother, that's a sense of, from my perspective and other people's perspective, right, it's a sense of compassion, a sense of understanding, a sense of like, man, I don't look at you negatively. I look at you like a brother, you know what I mean? And I've met a lot of black men that I would I'd go to war with, I would fight with, I would die with. At points in my life, I've legitimately fought beside brothers like that in riots, in jail, in fucking bathrooms, and all over the place to some extent. I wouldn't even do the same stuff with my two white brothers that I have, and that's the honest truth. Just because we don't have that kind of relationship. It doesn't mean that I don't love my brothers, I do, but the kind of relationships that I've legitimately been able to develop and nurture and cultivate with black men in my past is so much stronger than it's been with my white brothers that I was born with. And that's ultimately because, one, I became an orphan, and two, we never really had a relationship growing up thereafter. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of hard. Even though we tried to develop those relationships at one point, you know, it just never panned out. And then, you know, society and the world and all these other things started to kind of step into play, and you know, now we're at odd ends. I see my brother panhandling on the side of the street, and he stinks. I mean, one of them stinks. He's rotten, is what it is. I don't know what else to say. And he's racist as hell. So it's you know, the world is very interesting.